Namaskar. Good morning, everybody. Let us now continue today with our study of literary terms. Yesterday, you would have noted that we studied classicism, romanticism, feminism, and of course, modernism and postmodernism. We had noted that in classicism, if the core ideas revolved around the concepts of order, discipline, rules, regulations, decorum. We also had studied that in Romanticism, the focus, of course, was on imagination, intuition, individualism, among others. Moving on to feminism, we noted that the core ideas centered on questioning some of the traditional orthodox practices like patriarchy, the roles defined for women by men, and some of the old, outdated orthodox conceptions that have traversed in human history. Modernism, of course, and postmodernism, we had studied both in comparison as to how, following the world wars, there was an experimentation to be noted at various levels. So far as criticism is concerned, a mention, of course, should be made about new criticism and how T.S. Eliot and I.A. Richards, among others, initiated this movement so far as criticism is concerned. Today, we would take our discussion further and study the aesthetic movement. This movement, of course, is primarily the language of the senses, a language wherein excessive attention is given to the self. Somewhere, of course, there are purists who would also suggest that there is a hedonistic attitude ingrained in the study of aesthetics. The term hedonistic here needs to be understood in its totality. To be a hedonist would imply that you carry the philosophy of eat, drink, and marry. The concept of eating, drinking, and being merry, is suggestive of an approach, an attitude that looks upon the world as something which is final and complete and total in itself. And that primarily and primordially, it is through the senses that we get knowledge. So there is something of the empiricist also to be noted in this aesthetic movement. The philosophy, of course, being primarily art for art's sake. There is also a diversity and, of course, a perversity to be noted in the content of the aesthetics. The contemporary people and the contemporary society were disenchanted, particularly with the double standards being practiced in Victorian society. And this disenchantment, of course, found a vent, found a release in what we call as the aesthetic movement. There is absolutely nothing didactic to be noted in our study of aesthetics. Literature, from a dequency point of view, is absolutely for power, not for knowledge. There is no effort to teach or instruct. Rather, it aims at self-satisfaction. Among some of the most prominent people whose names ought to be mentioned here, among others are Walter Pater, 1839 to 1894, who suggested some of the concepts and ideas associated with the aesthetic movement. One also notes a complete rejection of religious faith, and that perhaps the contemporary practices were being subverted through what we refer as the modus operandi of the aesthetics. The aesthetics believe that the only means and the method for stopping art, for stopping time, pardon, is art. It's only through art that you can freeze the moment. What we also refer in Keatsian terms as the sculpturesque or the statuesque effect. Life, according to the aesthetics, should be lived as a work of art. There is a highly personal vision, which is reflected in the creations of these aesthetics, particularly in their works, in their paintings. One notices the qualities of intense experience, feeling, and sensations, and that there is again an emotional dimension, a strong emotional dimension that should be noted so far as this movement of aestheticism is concerned. The belief that art has no reference to life and has nothing to do with morality, and it need not be didactic. So concluding our discussion on this term, what we referred as the aesthetic movement, the motto of aestheticism was art for art's sake. And that moral concerns have to be kept apart, have to be kept aside. The keystone values of mainstream Victorian culture find assimilation and accommodation in this movement called as the aesthetic movement. And the leader of this movement was, among others, Oscar Wilde, who brought to light this philosophy of art for art's sake. Having studied the aesthetic movement and some of the concepts that emerged from this term, let's now move on to Expressionism. Expressionism is an art movement that came into being when artists became more concerned with expressing their feeling on an occurrence or object than with creating a photorealistic painting. Expressionism occurred mostly in Germany, and sometimes it is called German Expressionism instead. Expressionist artists used exaggerated colors, aggressive brushstrokes, exaggeration, and distortion to paint. You would note in this particular slide certain expressions that deserve our attention. Firstly, that it is a movement like aesthetics. The term expressionism would also suggest, would also imply the expression of the being of the individual. The artist is a being, who is more concerned with communicating his feeling about an object. He's not interested with having a modus operandi like we have in photography. There is no feeling that you find attached in photography. It is virtually a realistic capture. However, there is this element of emotion which is added, which adds colors. There is this combination of a variety of colors, exaggeration, and efforts are made to distort through paint. What are the key ideas that are associated with Expressionism so far as painting is concerned? Let's note the slide. It is a composite of bold, strong colors. It is definitely not about realism. It focuses on emotion, and that there is a strong connect between the artist and the work, or the viewer and the work. Images are distorted, and this has to be understood in the right perspective. That the distortion is from the realism, from the realistic approach that we have to the emotional approach. How do these realistic objects appear to the mind, to the vision of the artist? And that is deliberated and thought about in Expressive. After Expressionism, let's now study this movement called as Imagism. Imagism is a movement given to a movement in poetry originating in 1912, aiming at clarity of expression through the use of precise visual images. As you would have noted in Expressionism, here too in Imaginism, there is this idea of expression. And this expression is to be communicated through very accurate, precise visual images. Let us note some of the most prominent people, who were a part of this movement, the imagistic or the imaginistic movement. Among others, you have F.S. Flint, D.H. Lawrence, Richard Eldington, Hilda Doolittle, Ezra Pound, Emil Lobel, and John Gould Fletcher. What are the tenets of Imagism? Let's study them as closely as we can. The first tenet is to use the language of common speech, to employ always the exact word, not the nearly exact, not the merely decorative word. So the first tenet that you could note is that it aims at exactness. Not the nearly exact, but then the exact. The second, there is a treatment that we have, irrespective of our perspective or point of view, subjective or objective, there is a direct engagement, a direct treatment. And that an imagist would not use any word that does not contribute to the presentation. As I said, there is no beating about the bush. There is communication and perfect communication. So far as rhythm is concerned, the effort is made to compose in a sequence of the musical phrase and not in the sequence of the metronome. So there is an element of rhythm to be noted in the precise communication of the idea. The imagist aims at creating new rhythms, and through these new rhythms, he aims at expressing the new moods. He does not copy old rhythms, which merely echo old moods. The imagist desires to create that which has not been created, to compose that which has not been composed, and that the old, the dead, may not be copied again. There is a total presence of freedom given to the imagist. He permits himself total freedom, absolute freedom in the choice of subject. To present an image that again does not deal with vague generalities. It is accurate and it is precise. To produce poetry that is hard and clear, never blurred or indefinite. I think this is one of the most important tenet, one of the most important core ideas that the imagists underline, that their poetry, it should be hard and clear, meaning that it should not be soft and unclear. It should not be blurred or indefinite, but then accurate and precise. So concentration is the very essence of poetry. Having studied Expressionism and Imagism, we would now move up to the concept of Marxism. What is Marxism? Marxism is again a movement that began in the 19th century and has much to do with the working classes of the society. Marxism offered humanity a social, political, economic, and cultural understanding of the nature of reality, society, and the individual. The entire philosophy of Marxism revolves around the philosophy of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx, as you would note in the slide, was born in Trier, Germany in 1818, and that his writings became the basis of what we call today as the Marxist approach. He passed away on the 14th of March, 1883. What are the core ideas of Marxism? Let's study that through this slide. The Marxist attitude, as we say, does not believe in class systems, or rather, it is the community which is at the center. Talking in terms of a state, in the past or before the advent of Marxism, there was a tripartite division of the society. There was the aristocratic class, the bourgeoisie, and the proletariat class. Marxism, in fact, takes a very different approach. Underlying and emphasizing upon the need to transcend class systems and class categories, it emphasizes it is the society. The Marxist says that the society determines. It is the society that determines and formulates our mental processes. In fact, our very consciousness. So the engagement is not between the individual and the text, rather the engagement is between the text and the society, how the society reads and interprets the text. Taking a cue from history, Marxist thought focuses on class relations and societal conflict. One of the most important examples which is given, if you were to study as you like it from a Marxist point of view, that the conflict between the brothers that you have at the very outset in the first scene between Oliver and Orlando is because Sir Rowland the boys had left 1,000 crowns. However, the elder brother only gives education to Jacques and not to Orlando. And therefore, Orlando engages into a fight with Oliver, having been denied a genteel education. So this example would illustrate that at the heart of things, at the core of conflicts, it is economics which is perhaps working for bringing about a break in relationships. The experiences of individuals, in fact, are responsible They're responsible for shaping and developing a person's individual consciousness. However, in Marxist ideology, it is not the individual which is the focal point or which should be the focal point. Rather, it is the society which should be the focal point. Marx, in fact, goes about classifying history in terms of periods. There is a movement that we have, and the slide very clearly underlines that, from feudalism to capitalism, from capitalism to socialism, and from socialism to finally communism, we find that these structures, these economic structures, have over a period of time been working in various parts of the world. From having a feudal system, a feudal social system, we have seen how certain countries in the world have had adopted the capitalist approach, which carried the philosophy of the rich become richer and the poor becoming poorer. It's in this context between the feudal structure and the capitalist structure that Marxist comes to play a role, wherein the society becomes the focal point, the center, and that it is not the individual, but then the society which has to have ownership. And it is the community which, in fact, should be the ultimate goal. And that we need a situation wherein these class categories and class distinctions are wiped out for good. Having studied Marxism, let's move on to the concept of realism. Realism, as all of you have already studied, it's one of the oldest philosophies in Western literature. The term realism is derived from the Greek word res, which means real. The world is real and material. It is what we see, that which we view with our senses is real. The core ideas that are associated in realism move around some of these ideas that we have in the slide. A realistic individual would understand that the given universals that we have, what all that we view, the landscape that we see, all have a real objective existence. In spite us, despite us, they exist. And this theory primarily focuses on this idea that everything that exists, the particular things that exist in this world, they exist independent of our perception. The perception of an individual would differ from person to person. However, the world is a given universal. The world has an objective existence, and that it is independent of the human mind. So, if we were to define what is realism, we could say realism is a doctrine that the objects of our senses exist independently of their being known or perceived by the mind. It deals with the fact that reality has an absolute existence independent from our thoughts, ideas, and even consciousness. There is a connection which is being attempted to establish between the classroom and reality. But then reality is, as we have been saying it all through, it is independent. The classroom exists, the world exists. Our perception, of course, adds value or meaning, but then that is highly individual in nature. An ism which is associated with realism is surrealism, which comes about in the year 1924. Andhra Britain is a name that I'm sure all of you would remember, that is strongly associated with this movement called as surrealism. Surrealism deals with dreams, the unconscious, the element of chance, and the multiple levels of reality. During our study, you would all remember how we had made a classification between the conscious, the unconscious, the semi-conscious. There is reality existing at the conscious level, at the unconscious level, at the semi-conscious level. And there is this threshold, the threshold that determines or gives vent to a perception. So there is a very individual approach. There is a focus within. There is a focus inside. And this was so very brilliantly communicated by Andhra Britain. He defined it as based on a belief in the superior reality of the dream. The self, the personal, the individual, the labyrinths of the mind, the threshold of the unconscious, the conscious, the semi-conscious, all these are realities for the individual. So, again, coming to the core ideas of surrealism, one could say that surrealism engages itself with the odd, with the illogical, with the irrational, with the exciting and the disturbing. Odd, illogical, irrational, exciting, and disturbing. If we were to characterize or list out the characteristics of surrealism, please make a note of this, that it was a reaction to the chaos of the First World War. Andhra Britain and some of the other surrealists were primarily influenced by Sigmund Freud, the interpretation of dreams. That's a well-known work of Sigmund Freud. How the subconscious impacts the conscious. This is a subject which is deliberated at length. There are images which are postulated at the conscious, the unconscious, the semi-conscious levels. And there is a juxtapositioning which goes on between these three different states. So there is this engagement at a variety of levels. Moving on, let's quickly take stock of structuralism. Structuralism, as the term says, gives primacy to the structure. The structure is right at the center. The structuralist approach is again an interdisciplinary and a multidisciplinary approach, and that it has much to do with linguistics. Let's read this statement that we have in the slide. So far as structuralism is concerned, in language, units are words and the rules which are the forms of grammar which order words. In different languages, the grammar rules are different, as are the words, but the structure is still the same in all languages. Words are put together within a grammatical system to make meaning. The essence of the thought here is quite clear, that the structure is always the same, irrespective of our nationality or the language that we speak. The structure of the language remains the same. That is, the lang is the same. Parole as the individual utterance would differ from person to person. The father of modern linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure, his ideas on linguistics, in fact, would further elucidate the concept of structuralism. Language, as we know, is a composite of words and sentences. And language is based on a naming process by which things get associated with a word or name. The structuralists say that every word is a sign. And that sign is a composite of the signifier and the signifying, the sound and the concept. A sign is a combination of the concept and the sound image. It is this two terms put together that brings about the word into existence. The concept and the sound image, the signifier and the signifying. It is in this context, what we had referred earlier, that we need to take stock of how the structuralists, how Saussure made a distinction between lang and parole. If sign was a combination of the signifier and the signified, the second concept that he talks about in structuralism is the distinction to be made between lang and parole. Lang refers as such to the totality. It refers to a system, an institution, a set of interpersonal rules and norms in speech and writing. It includes a system of grammar, spelling, syntax, and punctuation. Lang, in fact, refers to the totality. It would be most appropriate to say that lang is language. It is the totality, the generality of language. However, parole is the actual manifestation of lang, the concrete use of the language, the actual utterances. Following the understanding of sign as a combination of the signified and the signifier, following our understanding of the concept of lang and parole, we now moved on to a study of the syntagmatic and the associative relations in language. The most important kind of relation between units in a signifying system is a syntagmatic relation. There is an idea that again is so very interestingly communicated here. As you would note in this slide, there is a linear relationship. There is a linear relationship. In spoken or written language, words come out one by one. because language is linear. It forms a chain by which one unit is linked to the next. I come to the college every day. It is a combination of all these terms, all these letters. I come to the college every day. The totality of this, the combination of all these terms, is the chain. The words form the sentence. And here, every unit, I come to the college. Every word here is important. Let's take an example. The cat sat on the mat. The mat sat on the cat. You would note the illustration here. If we are to take the English word order, the subject, verb, and object, and if we were to have the Japanese word order, we would have a subject, the object, and the verb. And examples of such a nature could be given. However, the syntagmatic relationship is a relationship which is primarily linear in nature. So conclusively, we would want to summarize what social structuralism is all about. It is based on three assumptions. The first assumption, the systematic nature of language, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The relational conception of the elements of language, where linguistic entities are defined in relationships of combination and contrast to one another. The arbitrary nature of linguistic elements, where they are defined in terms of the function and purpose they serve, rather than in terms of their inherent qualities. The first, the whole is greater than the sum of its part. The totality, the land is important, number one. The second, there is a relationship between every element of language. And this combination of words would differ from person to person, from region to region. And therefore, the relationship that we have, so far as the meaning of these terms is concerned, is highly arbitrary in nature. The linguistic elements would differ from people to people, from region to region, from country to country. The image of a cat, for example, or the image of a lion, that an Australian would have, or an American would have, or an Indian would have, would be very different. And it would be based on the experience that they have had at a local language. So far as the general nature of land is concerned, there is an understanding, there is a meaning, a commonality of meaning to be noted and seen. However, the difference is the difference in terms of the visualization that they have had. And therefore, meaning is, the meaning that which is created here is highly arbitrary in nature. And finally, let's come to symbolism. Symbolism is all about the study of symbols. How symbols, I'm sure all of our students again would remember, how we had studied a variety of symbols. What is the meaning of the, what do we communicate when we are showing a fist? What do we communicate, when we are using the cross as a symbol, Om as a symbol, and that, the term symbol itself, which is derived from the Latin symbolum, is implicative of a symbol of faith. And that symbols are a very, very important and inseparable part of literature. There is a creation of meaning. In fact, those who would want to be poets, this is something which is very important for them, that poetry is all about images. Poetry is all about powerful symbols, wherein the word, the symbol, establishes a direct, meaningful link between the object, the scene, the character, or action. The abstract ideas, the values, the persons, the ways of life, all that which we express. We would want to communicate in capsule form. And that poetry here, is a very powerful means, of trying to to compress, the universal into a very, very specific image. So, dear students, what we have done today, in continuation with what we did yesterday, I have tried to give you an overview of some of these isms. I hope you have heard me carefully. Do study. I'll be sharing this entire slide with you too. Do study, and maybe next week you would want to have a test on this. Thank you very much. Jai Hind. Namaskar.